James the second best. James and Edward are both engines of the same size. They both have black funnels, buffers at the front and tenders at the back. And they are both engines on the Fat Controller's railway. One morning, the Fat Controller brought a photographer to the sheds. The Fat Controller said. All the engines were very excited. James was sure his photograph would be taken. Thought James, announced the Fat Controller. Edward was delighted. But James couldn't believe it. He was sure a red engine would be just the thing for the poster. The photographer tried to take a picture of Edward, but James got in the way. Ordered the Fat Controller. James puffed sadly away. Soon the posters were seen all over the island. But James still wanted to be the poster engine. James puffed. Huffed Henry. Puffed Percy. Chuffed Thomas. James was cross. Pouted James. The next day, Edward and Thomas were working in the yard. Edward shunted his truck softly and smoothly. When James arrived, he shunted his truck softly and smoothly too. Puffed James. Teased Thomas. James wanted to be as good as Edward, so he raced off to collect his coal trucks. James delivered dirty coal trucks all afternoon. He got greasy, grimy, and grubby, and his bright shiny red coat was soon covered in coal dust. Puffed James. But James was so dirty, it took a long time to get him clean. James was soaked and scrubbed. They even brushed behind his buffers. Puffed Percy cheekily. Then James had an idea. He thought. So James puffed onto Gordon's line. Then he raced across the countryside. James rattled over bridges and clattered through tunnels. He really wanted to get in front of Edward. James puffed back onto Edward's line. Laughed James. Suddenly, the signal turned red. James applied his brakes and screeched to a halt. But Edward couldn't stop in time. Puffed Edward. Moaned James. Chuckled Thomas. But James didn't feel very good. He felt very silly. Soon Emily arrived with the Fat Controller. The Fat Controller said sternly. James puffed sadly. The children at the station were very sad. The children cried. James felt worse than ever. James puffed. Said the Fat Controller. Edward and his carriages were very heavy, but James pushed them slowly to the seaside. His pistons pumped and his axles ached, but James pressed on. They stopped along the way to pick up more children. The children cheered. James was so proud it made his boiler bubble. He felt more useful than he had ever done. Puffed Edward.